Chapter 8. Aj and Gerke spent the night curled up on the floor of the little summer house. It was a pretty place with a fretwork veranda and wooden steps, but no one used it now. Years ago the roof had begun to leak, and instead of mending it, the head keeper had put up a notice saying, "Private, no admittance." Dark privet bushes and clumps of laurel hid it from passerby. Only the animals came to it now, sparrows to preen in the lopsided bird bath, squirrels to chatter on the roof. Nearby, a patch of snoring grass showed where the ogre rested. Ben had smuggled the mist maker into his cupboard of a room. But Cornelius could not sleep. He longed to conjure up a fire to keep his old bones warm, but he thought it might be noticed, and after a while he took his stick and wandered off toward the lake. The Serpentine it was called because it was wiggly and shaped like a serpent, and he remembered it from when he had lived up here. Londoners were fond of it. People went boating there and caught tiddlers, that means little fish, and brave old gentlemen broke the ice with their toes in winter and swam in it, getting goose pimples but being healthy. But it wasn't just old men with goose pimples or lovers canoodling or children sailing their boats that came here. There were others. There had been mermaids in the lake when Cor was a little boy. Each tree had had its spirit. Banshees had wailed in the bushes. And on Midsummer's Eve they had gathered together and had a great party. Midsummer's Eve was in 2 days' time. Did they still come? The boggarts and the brownies, the nymphs and the nixies, the sproggans and the witches and the trolls? And if so, was there an idea there? If Raymond saw real magic, saw the exciting thing that happened on the island, would that persuade him to come? Cor's ancient forehead wrinkled up in thought. Then he raised his stick in the air and said some poetry, and seconds later Ernie Hobbs, who had been sleeping on a mailbag on platform 13 of King's Cross Station, woke up and said, "Ouch!" Looking about him, he saw that Mrs. Partridge, who'd been flat out on the luggage trolley, was sitting up and looking puzzled. "I've got a tingle in my elbow," she said. "Real fierce it is." At the same time, Miriam Hughes, the ghost of the apologizing lady, rolled off the bench outside the left luggage office and lay blinking on the ground. It was Ernie who realized what had happened. "We're being summoned. We're being sent for." "It'll be the wizard," said Mrs. Partridge excitedly. "There isn't no one else who can do tricks like that." Wasting no more time, they glided down the platform and made their way to the park. They found Cornelius sitting on a tree stump and staring into the water. "Did you call us, Your Honor?" asked Ernie. "I did," said Cor. He then told them what had happened earlier in Raymond's room. "We went to tell him who he was, but the noise he made was more than anyone could bear. We had to leave." The ghosts looked troubled. "We should have warned you, maybe," said Ernie. "But we thought he might be better with you." "Well, he wasn't." Cor rubbed his aching knees. "Hans wants to bop the prince on the head and carry him through the gump in a sack, but I think we must have another go at persuading him to come willingly. So I want you to call up all the unusual people who are left up here and ask them to put on a special show for Raymond. Wizards, will-o'-the-wisps, everyone you can find. Ask them to do the best tricks they can, and we'll build a throne for Raymond and hail him as prince." "A sort of Raymond Trottle magic show," said Mrs. Partridge eagerly. Ernie, though, was looking worried. "There's always a bit of ado on Midsummer's Eve, that's true enough. But, well, Your Honor, I don't want to throw a damper, but magic isn't what it was up here. It's what you might call the Tinkerbell factor." "I don't follow you," said the wizard. "Well, there's this fairy. She's in a book called Peter Pan. Tinkerbell, she's called. When people say they don't believe in her, she goes all woozy and feeble. It's like that up here with the wizards and witches and all. People haven't believed in them so long, they've lost heart a bit." "We can only do our best," said Cornelius. "Now tell me, what's the situation about, He spoke quietly, not knowing who might be listening in the depths of the lake. "Him, the monster. Is he still there?" "Old Knuckle? They say so," said Ernie. "But no one's seen him for donkey's years. Have you thought of calling him up?" "I was wondering," said Cor. "I happen to have my book of spells with me. It would make a splendid ending to the show." The ghosts looked respectful. Raising monsters from the deep is very difficult magic indeed. Well, if that doesn't fetch the little perisher, nothing will, said Mrs. Partridge, and blushed, because, nasty or not, Raymond Trottle was, after all, a prince. It was incredible how helpful everyone was. Witches who worked in school kitchens trying to make 2 pounds of mince go round 100 children said they would come. And so did wizards who taught chemistry and stayed behind to make interesting explosions after the children had gone home. An animal trainer who trained birds for films and television, and was really an enchanter, promised to bring his flock of white doves so that the evening could begin with a fly past. Melisande, the water nymph who was not a mermaid, swam through the outlet pipe at Fortlands and spoke to her uncle who was a Merrow and worked the sewers, dredging up stuff which people had flushed down the loo by mistake or lost in the plug hole of a bath, and he too said he would come and do a trick for Raymond. Really, people are so kind, said Gertie, as she ran about jollying along the tree spirits who had agreed to do a special dance for Raymond on the night. And she was right. After all, it wasn't as though they didn't know what Raymond was like. That kind of thing gets around. But everyone wanted the king and queen to be happy. The island mattered to them. It was their homeland, even if they themselves hadn't been there, and there seemed to be no end to the trouble they were prepared to take. The ghosts during those 2 days were everywhere, helping, persuading, taking messages. Even Miriam Hughes stopped apologizing and found a ladies' group of banshees. Those pale, ghastly women who wail and screech when something awful is going to happen. And they agreed to come and sing sad songs for the prince. A troll called Henry Prendergast, who lived in the basement of the Bank of England, said he thought he could manage some shape-shifting. And Hans tried to forget the hurt that Raymond had done him by calling him creepy, and practiced weightlifting till his muscles threatened to crack. As for Odge Gribble, she went off by herself in the underground to visit an aunt of her mother's. The aunt was an old woman of gloominess and absolutely marvelous at turning people bald, and she promised to bring some friends along from her sewing circle and amuse Raymond by making donkeys' tails come out of people's foreheads and that kind of thing. But it was Cor who worked himself hardest. Hour after hour, he sat by the lake with his black book practicing his monster-raising spell. He didn't eat, he scarcely slept, but he wouldn't stop. There was something special about the monster of the Serpentine, only he couldn't remember what it was. There was a lot he couldn't remember these days, but he wasn't going to give up. There was nothing Cor wouldn't have done to bring back the prince, unbopped and unsacked, to the parents who wanted him so much. The only thing that still worried the rescuers was how to make Raymond Trottle come to the park. Of course, it would be easy to call him by magic as Cor had called the ghosts, but they had promised faithfully not to use any magic directly on the prince. It was Ben who thought of what to do. There's a boy at Raymond's school called Paul, who's the son of a duke. Raymond would do anything to keep up with him. If we pretend that Paul's giving a secret party by the lake, I'm sure Raymond will come. Then his face became troubled. Of course it's cheating, I suppose. It's a lie. But Cor was firm about this. Bringing Raymond back to the island is like a military campaign, like a war. In a war, a soldier might have to tell a lie, but he'd still be serving his country. Ben's plan worked. Melisande knew a siren who worked in Fortlands showing off the dresses, and she borrowed a posh invitation card, and Ben pretended that Paul had bribed him to deliver it. And just before 12 o'clock on Midsummer's Eve, Raymond Trottle, in his jazziest clothes, arrived at the edge of the lake and found a great throne which the trolls had built for him, and a host of people who raised their arms and hailed him as prince. "A prince?" said Raymond. "Me?" "Yes, your highness," said the wizard, and told Raymond the story of his birth. Raymond listened, and, as he did so, a smug, self-satisfied smile spread across his face. "I always knew I was special," he said. "I knew it." And he climbed onto his throne. So let's just review what happened in this chapter. It's pretty basic, but it seems that Cor had an idea to get Raymond to come to the island, and his idea was to kind of have a little magic show with a lot of different magical creatures showing off their tricks to get him used to what it would be like on the island. So they're all preparing, and then finally the night comes, and Ben thinks of a trick to call Raymond to come, and Raymond comes, and let's see what happens in the next chapter.